Late one chilly autumn evening, Robert found himself wandering aimlessly through the dimly lit streets of his quiet neighborhood. He was in his late 50s, a man whose once lively spirit had slowly faded over the years. His hair had begun to silver at the temples, and his hands often shook with a subtle tremor he tried to hide. The air was sharp, and each breath of cold wind made him pull his coat a little tighter around his shoulders. He preferred these lonely walks at night. No one around to ask him questions, no one to notice the permanent sadness etched into his features. Yet, on this particular evening, something would shift in his life, and it would all begin beneath the weak glow of a single flickering street lamp. In that small pool of light, Robert noticed a shape curled up against the curb. At first, he couldn't tell if it was simply trash or something else, but then he saw it move, a feeble, trembling motion. His heart skipped a beat. He edged closer, each step echoing with a soft crunch against the scattered leaves on the sidewalk, until he could make out the figure of a stray dog. Its fur was matted and soaked from a recent drizzle, its ribs faintly outlined beneath the thin coat. The dog turned its head slowly, catching Robert's gaze with eyes so sad and pleading that he felt something tighten in his chest. For a moment, man and dog simply stared at each other, as though each recognized a shared loneliness in the other. Robert had never considered himself an animal person. In truth, he had spent most of his adulthood consumed by work. Family life had never quite happened for him. There had been a few relationships here and there, but none had lasted. And now, in the twilight of his working years, he lived alone, in an apartment cluttered with old memories and echoes of a life that felt unfulfilled. Taking home a stray animal was the last thing on his mind. Yet, there was something so vulnerable about the dog that he couldn't bring himself to walk away. The dog didn't bark or growl. It just gazed at him, tail tucked between its legs. It seemed resigned, as though it expected to be turned away, ignored, or worse. That silent plea stirred a compassion in Robert he hadn't felt in a long time. He knelt on the sidewalk, feeling the chill of the damp concrete through his pants. Slowly, he extended a hand, palm up, not wanting to frighten the dog. It sniffed tentatively, taking a careful step closer. Robert's voice came out in a hushed whisper. "Hey, buddy, it's okay." The dog's ears twitched. There was a brief pause, and then it licked his hand. Just once, a brief, tentative gesture of trust. Robert exhaled a trembling breath he didn't even realize he had been holding. In that instant, he knew he had a choice. He could rise and walk away from the scene, returning to his solitary existence, or he could open his heart, if only for a moment, to a creature that needed him. Somehow, the second option felt less daunting than the regret he would feel if he chose to abandon this fragile life. He wrapped the dog gently in his coat, lifting it from the cold pavement. The dog didn't resist. If anything, it seemed too exhausted to fight back. Robert felt its shivering body against his chest, and a wave of empathy washed over him. He whispered, "Let's get you warm." As he carried the dog down the lonely street, the faint sound of traffic a few blocks away mingled with the rustling of wind through the trees overhead. For the first time in a very long while, Robert felt a sense of purpose guiding him forward. His small apartment was modest, a single bedroom, a living area strewn with old books and newspaper clippings, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee and dust. He placed the dog on a tattered towel near the radiator, hoping the heat would soothe its trembling limbs. Then he rummaged through his cupboards for something suitable to feed it. He found a can of tuna and a half-empty carton of chicken stock. Probably not ideal for a dog, but better than letting it starve. The dog watched him warily at first, then devoured the makeshift meal with grateful fervor. Over the next few days, Robert found himself rearranging his daily routine around the dog's needs. He took it to a local veterinarian, who informed him that, despite being underweight and a bit malnourished, the dog was otherwise healthy, no more than 3 or 4 years old. Robert wasn't sure he was ready for the commitment of adopting a pet. He found himself muttering excuses about his age, his finances, or the possibility that the dog's real owner might show up any day. But in truth, he was hesitant because the dog seemed to awaken in him something he had long suppressed, the capacity to love and be loved in return. That vulnerability terrified him. Nevertheless, he bought dog food, a basic leash, and a small dog bed, setting them up in a corner of the living room. The dog, which he hesitantly named Charlie, proved to be gentle, quiet, and observant. Charlie would follow him from room to room, watching his every move, as though still uncertain if this newfound safety might vanish at any moment. At night, Charlie slept curled at Robert's feet. By day, they walked together through the neighborhood. People who had never paid any attention to Robert before would stop to pet Charlie and strike up a conversation. Some neighbors even smiled at Robert for the first time. It was as if the dog served as a bridge that connected Robert to a world he had once felt was closed off to him. One evening, Robert found himself sharing his dinner with Charlie, talking to him as though he were a longtime friend. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think I was better off alone. It's easier, right? Less messy, fewer disappointments." Charlie cocked his head to one side, ears perked up. "But maybe I was wrong." There was a faint, rueful smile on Robert's face. He realized that, in caring for Charlie, he was experiencing a warmth he'd denied himself for years. The guilt and regret he had carried over lost opportunities, broken relationships, and the mistakes of his past started to feel a little lighter. It was as if the simple act of loving a stray dog had begun to mend the tattered edges of his own heart. As the weeks went by, the transformation in both man and dog was evident. Charlie gained weight and energy, his once dull coat turning glossy with health. Robert, too, seemed rejuvenated. His shoulders no longer slumped under the weight of invisible burdens, and a softer expression replaced the perpetual frown that had etched itself into his features. He began to spend his weekends exploring nearby parks with Charlie, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the crunch of leaves underfoot. There were moments when he would pause and think, "I can't remember the last time I felt this content." Yet life has a way of testing newfound happiness. Late one afternoon, during one of their walks, a group of rowdy teenagers rushed by on skateboards. Startled by the sudden noise, Charlie bolted. The leash slipped from Robert's grasp, and panic rose in his throat as he watched Charlie disappear around a corner. Heart pounding, Robert sprinted after him, calling the dog's name. Memories of the empty streets where he first found Charlie flooded his mind. What if Charlie got lost or ran into traffic? He searched frantically, checking side streets and yards, calling Charlie's name until his voice turned hoarse. As dusk settled, Robert felt his heart sink with each passing moment. He had almost given in to despair when he rounded a final corner and saw Charlie, huddled beneath the same flickering street lamp where they had first met. The dog had returned there instinctively, as if it knew that was their beginning, the place Robert would look for him. Robert approached slowly, tears burning at the corners of his eyes. "You scared me," he choked out, kneeling down to wrap his arms around Charlie's neck. The dog let out a small whimper, burying its muzzle against Robert's shoulder. They sat there, under that feeble glow, man and dog reuniting as the sky darkened into a deep, starless black. In that moment, Robert understood that the bond they shared wasn't something fragile or fleeting. It was an anchor, a quiet promise that neither would ever be abandoned again. When they returned home, Robert sat down on his old sofa, and Charlie jumped up beside him, resting a warm muzzle on Robert's knee. The street lamp outside continued its intermittent flicker, a subtle reminder of the night Robert had chosen to open his heart. Robert gently petted Charlie's head and let out a slow exhale, feeling gratitude replace the panic that had gripped him earlier. His apartment didn't feel lonely anymore. The air, once thick with stale regrets, now felt filled with possibility. Word of Robert's rescued stray began to spread among his few acquaintances. One neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, was amazed at how lively Robert had become. The quiet man who used to avoid eye contact now greeted her on the sidewalk, happily accompanied by his loyal canine friend. She remarked one morning, "I've never seen you look so bright, Robert. I think Charlie's done you a world of good." Robert only smiled in return, acknowledging the truth behind her words. He had never imagined a stray dog could make such a difference. But Charlie's unwavering affection and companionship had somehow healed wounds Robert had carried for decades. Late that same night, he found himself reflecting on his journey. He thought about his younger years, the relationships that never blossomed, the ambitions he never fulfilled. And he realized something crucial. It was never too late to choose a path of kindness, whether toward others, ourselves, or the voiceless animals that share our world. In giving Charlie a home, Robert had, in a way, given himself a second chance. It dawned on him that opening your heart to love, even late in life, can spark a transformation you never expected. A couple of days later, Robert heard about a community event focused on helping stray animals. Volunteers were needed to distribute food and arrange shelter for abandoned dogs and cats. He decided to attend, bringing Charlie along. At first, he was nervous, unsure if he could handle the emotional weight of seeing so many homeless animals. But Charlie seemed confident, almost proud to stand beside him as they stepped into the busy community center. People were moved by the story of how Robert had found and rescued Charlie, and several asked for advice on how to care for a stray. By the end of the day, Robert felt invigorated. He had never been one for crowds or community gatherings, yet there he was, feeling more alive and connected than ever. When the event concluded, Robert realized that this was only the beginning of something greater. He joined a small group dedicated to fostering stray animals. "I can't let Charlie be the only one who found a home," he joked, though his voice held genuine conviction. Through that group, he befriended others who shared the same passion for helping abandoned dogs and cats. Each encounter reminded him that kindness, once ignited, tends to spread. And each time he told Charlie's story, people listened with a spark of renewed hope in their eyes. One evening, after another fulfilling day with the foster group, Robert returned home to the comfort of his little apartment. The light in his living room had grown warmer, whether it was the addition of cozy dog blankets or just a change in Robert's perspective, he couldn't tell. Charlie greeted him with a wagging tail, an expression of pure joy on his furry face. Robert crouched down, patting Charlie's side. "Hey there, boy," he murmured. "Can you believe how far we've come?" The dog replied with a happy yip, as if understanding every word. Robert sank into the sofa, Charlie curling up at his feet. For the first time in a very long while, Robert felt at peace. He recalled the night he had found Charlie trembling under that flickering street lamp, how uncertain and scared both of them had been. Yet, in choosing to help that stray dog, Robert had unknowingly opened the door to his own redemption. Life still had its challenges. His apartment was small, his finances weren't perfect, and sometimes his old loneliness would resurface in the quiet moments. But he had learned that even in the darkest corners, a single act of kindness can blossom into something that rekindles hope. In the days that followed, Robert continued to advocate for strays, sharing his story whenever he could. He reminded people that caring for a living being doesn't just help that creature. It has a profound way of mending our own broken places. Charlie's presence was a testament to that truth, a faithful companion who had arrived in Robert's life when he needed him most. And while Robert might not have been the hero he once aspired to be in his youth, he realized that in saving Charlie, he had discovered that being a hero in even a small way can change a life, often two lives at the same time. Sometimes, late at night, Robert would watch Charlie sleep, each gentle rise and fall of the dog's chest, reminding him of the quiet miracle of companionship. He would think back to that moment when he had hesitated in the street, unsure whether to walk away or pick up the stray. What if he had left Charlie there in the cold, alone and frightened? That choice would have condemned both of them to remain trapped in their solitary worlds. Instead, he had taken a chance on compassion, and it had reshaped the narrative of his life more than he ever thought possible. When autumn gave way to winter, Robert placed a small coat over Charlie's back to keep him warm on their brisk walks. People often smiled when they saw the dog trotting happily beside him. Some neighbors even stopped to offer treats or ask how Robert was doing. It was as though the very fabric of his community had changed around him. But in truth, it was Robert who had changed. He had opened his heart, and in doing so, discovered that a little empathy can illuminate even the darkest corners of one's life. And so, if there's anything to take away from Robert's story, it's that kindness has a ripple effect. One simple choice, to kneel down beside a frightened, lonely dog, led to a profound transformation for both man and animal. We all have that power within us, the ability to nurture and be nurtured in return. Love, after all, knows no age or boundary. It can find you on a deserted street under a flickering lamp when you least expect it. Thank you for listening to this heartfelt story. If you found meaning in Robert's journey and want to hear more inspiring tales, remember to subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world to me, and together we can continue sharing stories that remind us of the simple yet extraordinary power of love and compassion. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.